At its absolute military peak, was the Soviet Union the single most powerful country in the world at the time? Could the Soviets have destroyed the world with their nukes? Yes, they could, but so could the US, so that was a tie. Could they defeat any country in the world conventionally with its military? No, they could not. The Soviets could defend themselves, but had virtually no logistics to project that power beyond marching distance from their borders, unlike the US, who could. Military power is highly contextual. The details of a potential conflict determine what is valuable. Having said that, there was never a point at which the Soviet Union had categorically superior capabilities to the USA. From a conventional standpoint, the Soviet Union was more a paper tiger, much like Russia proved to be in its war with Ukraine. Yes, lots of military equipment and soldiers, but not very good quality. Military power is highly contextual. The details of a potential conflict determine what is valuable. Having said that, there was never a point at which the Soviet Union had categorically superior capabilities to the USA. I would say no too. I grew up in the US, and I've spoken to people who grew up in the Soviet Union and asked them if they felt the US was the most powerful then too, and they all said that no, they believed it was the Soviet Union. So the answer to this depends on who you're asking to quite a large extent. There was a good line in the TV series Chernobyl, "Our power comes from the perception of our power." They made sure the world thought they were more powerful than they actually were. Maybe for a short window in 1943 in non-expeditionary warfare before the US gained its battlefield experience. Maybe. There was also a lot of corruption within the Soviet military, particularly in the leadership. In 1980 there was a plane crash that killed much of the leadership of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. It was determined that the crash was caused by the high-ranking officers demanding that all the stuff they bought during the military conference they were attending be loaded onto the Tupolev Tu-104 plane, which had already had a rather poor safety record and multiple crashes at the time, causing it to be heavily overloaded and imbalanced. The pilot seemed to decide that death was preferable to getting sent to the gulags for refusal to follow orders, and tried to fly the plane anyway, which promptly crashed right after takeoff with 50 people killed, including the commander of the Pacific Fleet, 16 admirals, and 11 other high-ranking officers. https://n.wikipedia.org Wiki 1981 Pushkin Tu-104 crash. Russia has been the boogeyman for the untied states since WW2. It really stopped in the 1990s, but our politicians need to keep their defense companies going. After Afghanistan, Russia was really destroyed. Then the mob took over. The Putin. Russia couldn't fight off California, much less the entire US war they are fighting now is Ukraine. They see it as NATO being next to them directly, like we wouldn't let Mexico join the Chinese defense system. Outside propaganda fantasy? No, that was never the case. But Soviets were very big on propaganda fantasies, so much that people still believe this shit to this day. Big reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, fully believing it was going to be cakewalk, because of decades of internal propaganda of everyone telling themselves how big and powerful they were. Alas, once tested against reality, reality disagreed. Immediately after WW2 ended, Russia theoretically could have continued west. It would have been touch and go for the Allies in a conventional war. However, now Russia has gone from being the second biggest war machine in the world to being the second best in Ukraine. Such is the disastrous organization and tactical inefficiency of their army. The Soviets built things, but literally spent no money on maintenance. A nuclear missile is a highly advanced device that needs constant upkeep. If you don't put the money or time in, the missile will not work in a few weeks. Russia invaded Ukraine on 50-year-old tires. The tires fell to shreds as they drove. The United States spends millions on maintaining one missile each year. Costly, yes, but effective. If the United States had a nuclear war now, most of our missiles would work. Russia? Most of their missiles don't work. Having a big army just to show is threatening, but the military that actually works is another thing entirely. No, they may have been numerically larger, but they were always second place. Relative to other nations, I suspect that Russia's peak may well have occurred in another time. You're taking too many historical documentaries. In the real world there is no best. Geopolitics is a grand show for the public, not necessarily actual strength. That perception is a tool of perspective. Propaganda. You in general want hear that from more than popular depictions of history which are not nuanced enough to explain the actual complexities of geopolitics. It's a whole lot of claims from a particular perspective, not a general truth. That perspective can be horribly distorted. Russian tactics are to throw bodies at any conflict. Any country larger than it like the US can easily beat the Russians. No. Can you be more specific on when? Because technically, at the end of WW2 was their actual military peak in men, relative power, etc. But 1960s USSR would probably roll over 1945 USSR, and 1980s might even beat that. Although, if 1980s USSR could beat America at that point, meanwhile in the 60s or 70s the USSR might take the win. 1945 USSR best Germany, SUO, yeah, I guess they were the strongest single country at that time if we're not counting nukes, which I'm not for any of these. 1960s Soviet military, yeah, they can probably best the West in a conventional war. By the mid-1980s 550 by the 1980s Gunno the West would win by a county mile. F-117, F-15, F-14 Leopard 2 Challenger 2 Abrams compared to the pop-off tanks of T-72 and its derivatives the BMP-2 with the gas tank at the exit doors. At its absolute military peak, the Soviet Union was the best in the world at throwing meat at the opposition until they ran out of bullets. Pretty much how they still operate.